Has it ever occurred to people who travel overseas that God seems to at times do more there that we then don't see happening at home? Is it not true that sometimes maybe people's desperation and passion for God in nations where they have no Medicare, where their backs are against the wall, that God seems to respond to the desperate and hungry faith and bring miracles and outworkings of His grace, of His provision, that we would just love to see back home, and we wonder, why do we not see the same results? Well, of course, it can't be all on us. But on the other hand, we're looking over this day at what it is too that we can do. I guess a trip should be more than Christian tourism. It should hopefully fuel us with some fresh vision and passion and a desperation to see God do more at home. But I've been to a number of nations, and one where God really grabbed my heart with new passion for ministry was the Philippines. I've been several times, worked with churches over there in different parts of the nation, and some of you would know that it's a strongly Catholic country, but there's also an island down south called Mindanao, where there's a warning not to travel because of past terrorist activity, and it's been a Muslim stronghold where radical groups have sought to section off a portion of the nation for themselves. So I went to Mindanao anyway to work with a church in Zamboanga City. And I got told that in that city, the homes have to be built with concrete, and they showed me the bullet holes as to why. They said there are gun battles in the street here, and you don't want one of these bullets piercing your home and risking killing you. I was wondering when the next plane was going to fly out, and I got told, "Don't worry, Pastor, we've given you a bodyguard. He used to be in the army." The fact that he had no gun was a little worrying, but I had to put myself in their hands. It was about that time as we were wandering the streets, they said, "Oh, by the way, look at the hills in the distance." I could see them clearly, and they said, "Pastor, do not go there, because if they capture you, they will hold you for ransom. And if it is not paid, they will kill you." I said, "That will be no problem at all. I'll stay right here with you." But in seeing the hunger of people for the gospel, in seeing the passion of people who are in that city, perhaps for most the only city they would ever know, their desperation was to see people in their township, whether living for a long time or a short time, their hunger was to see them come to faith. They wanted Jesus more than anything. And it's against that backdrop that I'm going overseas to nations like that, or South Africa, Papua New Guinea, and working with some of the churches that have hungry and desperate people seeking for God to move in His power in their city, that there are also outpourings of His grace with healing. Seeing a staggering number of people physically healed in ways I haven't always seen, sometimes in Australia, but nowhere near the same degree. I saw 5 people who were instantly claiming to see clearly, when previously one had had virtually no vision at all, others it was blurred vision, and suddenly it's crystal clear. There are other people whose backs were straightening in my hands as I was praying for them. One lady who could not walk to the service unaided, who was completely healed, evidenced by the mobility and the tears, I might add, that were streaming down her cheek. That's not because I have some great healing ministry. I think God sometimes visits His favour in a moment because He loves people, but He also wants to respond to our faith. So what do I do with that when I come home? What do I do to cultivate something? I stood up in a leaders' meeting one night, and I talked about what God had done in one of these nations. And my bookkeeper said, "I felt like standing up as you were speaking and saying, 'What's the matter with you people? Can't you get a bit excited?' I said, 'Maybe you should have.' But in our comfort and wanting sometimes more to happen, we feel perhaps in Australia like we're too busy for it to happen through us. And many people will want it, but not necessarily pay, or as Stuart Robinson says, pray the price." Ron Sider, in his book Christians in the Age of Hunger, rightly points out, though, that what we need is not just the good news. There's a certain selfishness that comes with people seeking miracles and gifts of the Spirit for their own enjoyment and experience. How many refreshing times do we need before God propels us out of the door to make a difference? He says we need a balance between good news and good works. Faith without works, after all, James tells us, is dead. And what he says is that a holistic faith is not about justice at the expense of evangelism, and it's not about proclaiming the good news of Christ without automatically feeling this compulsion to make a difference in our world. Coming from a Pentecostal tradition, it always gripped me, the stories of the Azusa Street revival. It was an outpouring of God in a supernatural way that touched the globe, but it was a revival led by African American people, people who are financially, socially disadvantaged. It was led in many cases by women. And God is the great leveller in societies, the great equaliser in pouring his Spirit out on his sons and his daughters, and people of all backgrounds. And he might do it in different ways and in different seasons of grace, but he wants to make a powerful and transforming difference to people around us. Do we see that here in the churches of Christ? Yes, of course we do. We see many examples. But for me, possibly closeted away a little bit in one tradition for a while, before my eyes were opened, I got a little bit narrow as a relatively new Christian, thinking my context was the only one that God could bless. I went and worked in a Christian school for a while and saw people from all different traditions and appreciated the different streams of revival, the different ways in which God moved, the different levels of depth of people's own spiritual faith. I learned to appreciate more and more that God doesn't operate according to what sign is above the door, but he's knocking on the door of our hearts and just waiting for us to open. So as a pastor, when I asked that question, would our local community notice if we closed our doors? Would they really care? It started the team in the church in response to the prayer meetings and further deliberations, working out how we could strategize, deploy funds, reach more nations, do more locally. What we did as a church was paid for an entire primary school education for a child. No funder who would rip the rug out from under a kid's feet halfway through. We funded the whole thing for a matter of hundreds of dollars, and we were getting feedback about the difference that it was making. Some people would say, well, that's great for the Philippines, but what about here at home? I said, well, what would you suggest? Well, I think we as a church, I said, I'm grateful that God is speaking to you. What are you going to do about it? We would like to get alongside and help you. And what we saw was the birth of a registered charity that began to feed people a monthly meal, people who often couldn't get one, from very significantly disadvantaged backgrounds. We'd have them on our turf, not to preach to them, but to love on them. Some of them never came to church, and that had to be okay, because our care can't be conditional. And in loving people, they sometimes took advantage of it. They sometimes had high expectations, unreasonable ones. While we go back to our comfy homes where we've got a little house for our car, we put our drinking water on our garden, everything comes pretty easy. People started to feel the tug. At cost to themselves, they wanted to give, they wanted to sow, they wanted to provide for others. Food parcels given away, all sorts of local community initiatives, including one that we were very proud of, which was to provide accommodation, short-term accommodation with social work support for people who were in desperate need. Crises in their lives where no one was able to help them, but the church got some good press by jumping to the cause, but not for the sake of the publicity, but for the sake of the need, and more importantly, for the sake of the person created in the image of God. If our evangelistic zeal, our passion in prayer, does not result in us doing the works, then one has to wonder if we're not just a little selfish and religious in a whole new way. My leadership team was around 50% women, and I'd have to say as a generalisation, they were typically better at creativity, at seeing the need, at meeting it, and the balance of genders, of old and young, of people with different life experiences was very significant in actually helping just to distill the kind of faith being outworked in a church community. But I had 3 men who at different times came to me and admitted an alcoholic addiction. They were examples of people who'd been loved effectively through the door of the church, but weren't able to respond to the gospel because there's a hole in their heart. In every one of their cases, there was a past problem, an affirmation void, a relationship breakdown with their father. There was different levels of abuse at work in their childhood, and they'd medicated themselves with alcohol. They had to come to the realization that their response to their crisis was their responsibility, their choice. They had done damage to their family members and friends. But the ones that saw that most, the ones that through counsel, through prayer, through a work of the grace of God, responded the most, were the ones who owned it the most. You know, as an aside, I often saw marriages get restored, but only ever when the man in the marriage was prepared at least to take some responsibility for it having broken down. Where a man was proud, laying the blame at his wife's feet, it was very difficult. In the case of these guys who admitted to me they had a drinking problem, the one who justified himself, who tried to find reasons to explain it all away, very quickly hit the bottle again. And interestingly, he was probably the most religious in wanting to serve and help and get involved, almost as if it was some sort of a distraction. And when the acid was on and people were starting to confront him lovingly, it was easier for him to leave. Go join another church and hope no one would ask too many questions. And people from very different ethnic backgrounds, very different circumstances, but the second one, he owned it a little more. And he started coming and wept tears of genuine repentance for the pain he'd put his wife and his children through. But the one that changed the most of all was the guy who cried in my office as I led him to Christ, because he'd responded to the grace, to the love of others, to the lack of judgment and condemnation, to actually say, I need to respond to what I'm seeing, but I don't know what to do. And seizing the moment to draw the line in the sand, lovingly help him step across, and then journeying with him on the unpacking of that faith, the building of discipleship one step at a time. I could say now, he attends church weekly. He's repaired his marriage. He has it in the best place it ever was. But he had to first weep over the fact that he had hidden his dark secret behind the bottle for 50 years. I was the first person he ever told. And I wonder, could there be people that want to talk to you? Could there be people who want to open their hearts? That is happening all the time. There are opportunities unfolding right before our eyes. It's fabulous to see, having come into this movement over the last year. We've got churches that are actually baptizing people. I'm going to services and seeing it, hearing churches saying, and we've got more next week. We've got at the AGM tomorrow 8 new churches and 2 new ministry agencies affiliating with the Churches of Christ. They're saying, I want a family to support me, to help me. Some have journeyed with us for a while, and others, including some recent pioneered churches, are finding new life. And it's a work of God in their midst, in their context, that we can all celebrate together. You know, we've got churches that have had a long heritage. We think of Berwick Church of Christ, celebrating next month their 150th anniversary. How about we give them a hand? Isn't that great news? You know, last year we had one of their pastors, Charmaine Viss, standing here and being endorsed and ordained as a minister. And she's got a significant role in community ministry in that church. And it's great to see her faith in action. The church has just welcomed a new senior minister, Bram Bota. Is Bram here today? Yeah, congratulations. Good to see you, Bram. And welcome to Australia. Bram has just recently come from South Africa and been appointed to that role. to replace Ken Raymond, who did a fabulous job as a 3-year interim. And we have also this year Ringwood Church of Christ celebrating 100 years. Its 100th birthday coming up. Congratulations. Kay's here as the new senior minister there. And what's really a delight to see is that through Kay's ministry, she's been able to help another church, Emmanuel, who are meeting on site with a Burmese congregation, and there's a partnership of support that's happening there. Think of Baronia and Bayswater joining forces to reach the same part of Melbourne. And Becky, who was up here before, has got some really innovative ways of helping maximise her space with different congregations that are meeting and seeing growth, fresh life in the church. We've got also Bayview going and helping Footscray. And could it be that your church, by, as I said earlier, reaching out and asking for help, that maybe that help can come from a variety of sources? We don't want to presume in the CCVT office that all the magic happens in Fairfield, although quite a bit of it does. There's some great people doing awesome things and helping churches that are reaching out. And we, as I said, want to provide more of that. But some of you can support each other. And more networking, more asking, more picking up the phone, catching up for coffees and lunches with people can stimulate these sorts of natural workings of the work of the Spirit in our church and in our lives. We've got churches small and large doing fabulous things. Discovery Church, they're doing the winter relief for the homeless, partnering with 7 churches, and that makes a big difference, putting their finances and not just their time into a great need. We've also got Ararat Church of Christ, and recently ran a real-life weekend, and with just a few dozen people, a massive event that impacted the community over several days, and they've seen new people come into their church. We've got churches like Mornington, and as you saw, Northern and Monbulk that are running op shops that are financing the work of the ministry, but importantly, creating contexts where they can be reaching people with the unconditional love of God. We've got Hobart that are appointing people to do youth and children's work. You'd say, I don't have youth or kids. That's why you need a youth and kids leader. You've got to get them first so that you're rejuvenating and you're building. And it's not that Hobart don't have them, and it may be a little easier for some churches to fund it, but they're saying there's a need. They reached out to us saying, how could you help? And through some of the different funding pockets available, we'd love to see how we can. That extends to the planting and pioneering of new churches. We want to do that strategically to reach some of the regions of Victoria and Tasmania that need new churches. But sometimes there's new initiatives that reach perhaps a mono-ethnic culture or a particular need in a particular way. For sound strategic planning, where it's well thought through, we would like to be releasing over the next few years $15,000 in startup funds to help these churches get going that meet the criteria, and then we can tap external funding when they've gotten to a certain size to really help put some legs on the need for more churches so that there's more leaders, so that there's more people being reached. You know, we've got training options that we're looking to accelerate. We want through our office to be partnering with churches, but it's local churches that raise up leaders. Leaders beget leaders, pastors beget pastors, and we want to help with the process as a movement to resource each other and to also see the colleges play their part. It's great to see that we've got some displays here where people can register and get involved at Stirling, at ACOM, and the ministry training is not easy to enact sometimes. You feel as a pastor like you're releasing people to something over there, and you might wonder whether they're actually going to then be utilised or deployed in your church. But when we all work together, we can actually see that happen. I'm going to talk more over this weekend about some of the initiatives for that. But what we'd like to do as CCVT collectively is to build shared ownership of a leadership pipeline where we're providing resources and helping people to grow and develop. We've got people like Andrew Menzies and Dean Phelan who co-wrote a book. We want to see the academic interest stimulated as people are writing, as they're exercising leadership in multiple different ways. The Church of Christ can be seen to be cutting edge, but importantly, through its output, touching multiple lives in different ways. It's great to see that people like Gill and Graham Cann are still writing and releasing books at the advanced stages of their ministry. And wouldn't it be great if some of our younger up-and-coming leaders were publishing in journals, were leading the way with leadership that gets the attention of the Christian church around Australia? We've got churches small and large, maybe churches like yours, making a wonderful difference. Don't give up on imagining what God could do yet again, but don't cease to appreciate what he has already done. As we remind ourselves of the good things of the past and the present, we build faith and we build the belief that God can do it yet again.